So let me welcome everybody, especially representatives from ministries, embassies, partners, CGIAR colleagues, distinguished guests, really everybody most welcome. We're really pleased to have you here this afternoon. Welcome also to the 60+ people so far online. Thank you for coming. Thank you for starting off the week with this exciting and I hope rather unique event. Welcome to ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute, a CGIAR Center. My name is Shirley Tarawali. I'm Assistant Director General here, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm sure many of you are aware of the EAT-Lancet report that first launched in 2019, and it was viewed as a little bit negative towards livestock at that time, lacking in nuances, in contextualization, and not taking too much account, perhaps, of the situation across lower middle-income countries. The second EAT-Lancet report was launched just a few weeks ago. And in addition to looking at planetary health and planetary boundaries, this one has a new element on justice, and it also pays a lot more attention to context. And today we're really fortunate to have the opportunity to engage with the report's commissioners and contributors, Mario Herrero, Daniel Masson de Cruz, and Namakolo Kovic, who will introduce later properly, along with other key actors in the livestock systems and food systems transformation space. And ILRI is really pleased to host this dialogue because we see it as a key opportunity to understand the findings and the implications of this report for African livestock systems, and importantly, to grasp the opportunity this gives us to identify pathways for further collaboration to ensure healthy and sustainable food systems. So we're going to use this afternoon to highlight some of the relevant findings from the report, particularly relating to African food systems, to unpack, contextualize those findings, what they might mean as recommendations for policy, investment, and practice here in Kenya and in other African countries, and to really see if we can give some thought to clear pathways and actions for future research, for evidence generation, policy analysis, so that we can accelerate the recommendations from the report. So enough from me. Let's get started. And I'd like to first welcome ILRI Director General Apollinaire King to give his opening remarks.
Thank you, Shirley. Greetings to you all in the room here and to colleagues online. Let me first acknowledge the presence of ambassadors and head of missions. I also want to acknowledge the presence of a representative of the government of Kenya and the East African community. Our guests, esteemed experts, and fellow advocates. I call you advocates today because we are here in the part of our job which is related to advocacy. Today we are gathered at ILRI for a crucial conversation. The EAT-Lancet 2.0 report is more than just a document. You have seen our concept note that we share with you in inviting you. The world today is a different world that we knew 10 years ago or even earlier. And the world tomorrow will be the world that we design today. The world 10 years down the road should be the world that we're here to design. We are also here to ensure that when there is evidence, there is they are deliverable from research, we're able to share it. We publish papers, we do communications, but often we don't have platforms like this to talk with everybody and say, this is what is happening. What's the impact on what we do today, we do tomorrow, and how we shape our organizations to take some of these recommendations. As we meet today, 9.6 billion people are projected to call our planet home in 2050. Our food systems will be put to the test. And the test is, will we be able to nourish 9.6 billion people sustainably in 2050? The answer probably should start from this room, or maybe we can design that to happen. The stakes are high. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and persistent hunger threaten our regions and the world. We're having this conversation in East Africa, and I hope that we can take this to other regions so that the EAT-Lancet report is not just left for those who can read it. It is for us to use and shape how we can continue on this journey. Amidst these challenges lies an opportunity. The EAT-Lancet shows us that a different path is possible, a path that prioritizes healthy diets, sustainable production, and justice for all. And this is what is in the report. And today we'll be unpacking that. In East Africa, and all specifically in Kenya, where agriculture is the backbone of our economies, we have a unique chance to lead. By embracing the principle of planetary health diet and the EAT-Lancet report, we can nourish our people. We can protect our planet. We can also promote justice, through which we can ensure fair wages, decent work, and access to healthy food for all. Over the next few hours and even days and years, I hope this is an ongoing conversation, we'll be exploring the implications of the EAT-Lancet 2 report for our region. We'll be discussing the opportunities and challenges and identify concrete actions to drive the transformation which is needed. Let us work together to create a food system that serves both people and the planet. Let us also build a future where healthy diets and affordable, sustainable are accessible to all. And I want to finish by thanking the people that we have in this room. The EAT-Lancet report had many people who contributed. And we're very fortunate to have 3 of them in this room, Mario Herrero and Daniel, all from Cornell University, and our own Namukolo, who have been part of this report that we are consuming now. And I want to once again thank you all and wish all of us a very good afternoon on our beautiful campus. And I urge you that the conversation doesn't end here, that we continue the conversation to shape the world and to make sure that when some of us will not be here, the 9.6 billion people will continue to eat sustainably. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Apollinaire. Is this thing working? Oh, okay, good. It's now my pleasure to welcome Richard Kuma, who is the Chief Executive Officer for the Kenya National Livestock Development and Promotion Service. He's also representing Kenya's Principal Secretary for Livestock, who is also ILRI board member. Richard, please.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you might be listening to us. As you've been told, my name is Richard Kuma. I'm here to convey a note from the Principal Secretary of the State Department for Livestock, Kenya. And before I do that, I would also want you to understand in detail who I am, because I feel I'm with the right audience whom we should be engaging from here going forward. And as the moderator said, I'm the CEO of the National Livestock Development and Promotion Service. This is a new state corporation in Kenya, which is domiciled in the State Department for Livestock. The main mandate of this state corporation is to make sure that the livestock and livestock products are delivered into local and international markets in the right quantities, right qualities, and in the right consistency, following what the market demands and following all the protocols, both local and international. As we do that, we must stop these animals from dying unnecessarily due to loss or to lack of feed, and make sure that the farmers and left producers, we commonly call them pastorists in Kenya, are put into productive farmer organizations where they have a upper hand in terms of lobbying and looking for their markets. Having said that, I'll go straight and deliver the note from the Principal Secretary in the State Department for Livestock. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the government of Kenya and the Principal Secretary for Livestock and early board member, Jonathan Mweke, I am pleased to join this timely regional dialogue. I would like to thank EARLI and Dr. Apollonia Dikane for allowing us to open this meeting and frame the EAT-Lancet report within African and Kenya food systems context. The cornerstone of the government of Kenya food systems transformation strategy are bottom-up economic transformation agenda, better, and the Kenya food systems transformation strategy of 2024-2033. The better agenda seeks to boost agricultural productivity and reduce the cost of living, expand value addition and agro-processing, create jobs for youth and women, strengthen cooperative models and digital platforms, and modernize livestock systems in pastoral regions. Livestock transformation is therefore central to delivering nutritious, affordable food and dignified livelihoods. The National Agroecology Strategy for Food System Transformation of 2024 to 2033 provides a coordinated national framework to promote healthy, diversified diets, enhance ecosystem resilience, reduce reliance on external inputs, improve soil and animal health, support women, youth, and marginalized groups, strengthen circularity, and reduce food loss and waste. It complements Kenya's Vision 2030, the agricultural sector transformation and growth strategy, and the constitutional rights to adequate food and a clean and healthy environment. Importantly, the agroecology is not about lower productivity. It is about better productivity, and that's important, rooted in ecological intelligence and local knowledge. The EAT-Lancet 2.0 report recommendations aligns well to many of Kenya's ambitions for national development. They provide an excellent bias from which to further develop national solutions that address three dimensions: planetary health, planetary boundaries, and social foundations. Many African diets have the right ingredients for nutrient-dense foods, such as local fruits, vegetables, legumes, and animal source foods. But our challenge is to make these accessible, widely available, and affordable. This report acknowledges the universal dietary prescriptions must be adapted to cultural and socio-economic realities. Importantly, the richest 30% of the global population account for more than 70% of the planetary pressures from food systems. Africa's contribution is comparatively low. What we need to think about at this dialogue is that Africa's rapidly growing urbanization, population growth, and youth are reshaping diets. Demand for affordable, safe, convenient, and animal source foods is rising. The question is not whether demand will grow, but whether we can meet it sustainably, and to do it within the EAT-Lancet planetary boundaries, particularly around emissions, climate, and land use. The Commission highlights major inequalities in whose benefits and who bears social, environmental, and nutritional burdens. African countries must protect the right to increase nutrient intake while building climate-smart solutions tailored to our realities. Animal source foods are essential for growth, cognitive development, and micronutrient security. From a livestock perspective, which we acknowledge legitimate concerns about climate and environmental impacts, the solution in Africa is not less livestock, but better livestock. This includes improved feed productivity and forage systems, animal health interventions that reduce disease losses, genetics suited to heat and drought, circularity through manure management and feed waste conversion, the transformation of markets and value chains to make animal source foods more accessible, ensuring that livestock transformation is contributing to equitable livelihoods and job opportunities, and supporting youth to find dignified jobs. These interventions are already features of the Kenya's dairy transformation agenda. I wish to add there also, it's not just for dairy, but the whole livestock sector. The Kenya values contribution of CGIAR, of national research institutions and universities in providing solutions, evidence, and support improving both food systems in Kenya. Kenya seeks continued partnership on data, modeling, scenario analysis to contextualize global recommendations. Today's dialogue provides a great start for us to examine and plan towards a better understanding how we shape and define Kenyan food systems transformation. We also need to review the EAT-Lancet report and strengthen national dietary guidelines with the local science, local solutions, and local foods. This applies to not only Kenya, but other African countries. Together, through science-based policy, investment in smallholders, and alignment with the national development agendas like BETTER, we can build healthier, more equitable, and more sustainable food systems for all. With innovation, we can achieve a triple win: a better nutrition, better livelihoods, and a better planet. As the Commission report highlights, healthy, sustainable, and just food systems. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's really good to hear that there's such good synergy and alignment at this high level. We're going to need to think about what does that look like? What does that mean? But first, let's make sure we all know what this report's about. And I'm really pleased to welcome for a start ILRI's Namakulukovic, who is one of the EAT-Lancet commissioners, and she's ILRI's Director General Representative to Ethiopia. She's come from Ethiopia to share with us today, and she's going to give us a broad overview. What does this mean for food systems in Africa? Namakolo, please.
I have some slides. All right. So I will focus on the EAT-Lancet within the context of African diets and food systems. The modeling work and what has emerged out of there will be covered by my colleagues. So this is where I would like to start. This is the state of food insecurity in the world report. And here, I want you to move from left to right with me. The world, Asia, stop at Africa, and see that the red and orange or yellow are those that are experiencing either severe or moderate food insecurity. You can see that for Africa, almost the entire circle is filled of some form of food insecurity. The implication of this is that Africa has the furthest to go to bridge productivity and production gap for food. And how we do that needs to be very much informed by some of the challenges that the EAT-Lancet report brings up. This slide shows us what our outcomes look like based on the Global Nutrition Report. On the left, you can see that we've made some progress on reducing stunting between 2000 and 2020, but this reduction is not good enough to actually reach our SDG 2030 targets. But at the same time, if you look to the right, for young girls, girls 5 to 19-year-olds, you can already see a challenge. We have increased in overweight and obesity. When you get to adult women, 45% is now average overweight or obesity. This comes with health consequences. At the same time, whether it's undernutrition with stunting or the people that are overweight and obese, both categories of malnutrition suffer from micronutrient deficiencies. So we have multiple nutrition burdens that our food systems currently are not delivering enough for the majority. This is also from the Global Nutrition Report, and you can see the limited progress on stunting given there. But I want you to go to the middle line there, and you can see there that sodium intake for women and men are literally off course. None of our countries on the African continent are meeting the targets here. 53 off course, 1 no data. Same for raised blood pressure. You can see 53 countries off course. For obesity, women, same thing. If you looked at the men, it's the same thing. And then for diabetes, again, the same thing. So you can see that we have a problem. Our problem is not just undernutrition, it is also we are having this overweight and obesity that has come at a time when we are still grappling with undernutrition across the board. I'm using Ethiopia here as an example just to drill in a little bit, and you can see the red one is the national one. So fruit, not enough consumption, vegetables, not enough, legumes, not enough, in spite of the fact that the traditional consumption patterns of Ethiopia is one that has a lot of pulses. Nuts, not enough. Whole grains, they are doing probably better than the rest of the planet. And it's because most of the grains in Ethiopia are consumed whole grain. Fish, not enough. Dairy, not enough. Red meat, not enough. But just to remember that these are averages. And so when you have an average, there's those this side and those at the other end. So it's important to keep that in mind. Since we are in Kenya, I've got the Kenyan diagram as well. Fruits, not enough. Vegetables, not enough. Legumes, not enough. Nuts, not enough. Whole grains, not enough. Worse than Ethiopia. Fish, not enough, but better than Ethiopia. Dairy, not enough. Red meat, we've gone off the limit. And the question you need to ask yourself here is, remember I said it's averages. And so we do have those that underconsume, we have those that overconsume. So those few of us that may be able to overconsume our nyama choma are perhaps consuming much more than we ought to, that we should. Here, I want to reflect, this is the Burden of Disease Report 2023. I really want to draw your attention to the stars in the interest of time. Cardiovascular diseases have gone from number 14 as a cause of death to 6. That's a very sharp rise in terms of cause of disease. In terms of diabetes, again, you can see we've moved from 16 to 15. In some countries, that is even more steep than that. What am I trying to say here? It's the same story again. Undernutrition is with us, but at the same time, we have diet-related non-communicable diseases that we need to address. And so the EAT-Lancet report has came and has come again. And really, often we get asked, does the planetary health diet talk about planetary boundaries? The actual analytical work does not address planetary boundaries at all. It's all based on health outcomes. What consumption levels do we need to address undernutrition, but at the same time to also evade the risk towards diet-related non-communicable diseases. So you have ranges of consumption within which different contexts should then address. And here, this is one of the newer perspectives in the Lancet 2025, and it's this recognition. I think we were told about the justice perspective. The justice perspective addresses distributive components, because we know, remember I kept talking about averages deliberately. Some consume more, some consume less. There's a distribution issue. And then we also have the representational perspective, where we want people to have just living wages as well from what they are producing. Then finally, the other thing is the recognitional. And here, it's recognizing the fact that there are different types of diets that are possible across different contexts, and you can meet these within the ranges that are provided for. We know that our planet is in trouble, and we have a number of boundaries. The yellow line is what we are calling the planetary boundaries, and you can see the extent to which we have transgressed those boundaries for the biosphere, for climate, for water, even for nutrient, phosphorus and nitrogen are off the charts. The issue with food systems is as follows. That is the contribution of food systems to the transgression of those boundaries, implying even if we addressed fossil fuels completely, we would not be able to come back down to the 1.5 degrees that we talk about if we do not address the food systems. So it's quite a significant contribution. And this is where the people sitting in this room are. How are we going to address the needs of more consumption for those that need to consume more, and do so within planetary boundaries? So our brains need to work with that. It's not a question of we can think about it next year or we'll think about it in 50 years' time, because there might not be a planet by the time we start thinking. I want to bring this back to the African continent. We sit on a continent where there is quite a coalescing of policy instruments at the moment. We have the African Union Climate Change and Resilience Development Strategy that speaks about us developing within planetary boundaries, developing in such a way that we actually address the challenges we are facing in climate. This is a realization that if we do not do that, we won't even be able to support the food security, the food insecurity that we currently have. I indicated at the beginning, we have the continent with the furthest to go on food production, and we can produce that food paying attention to climate issues and ensuring that we can produce better. Or if we ignore the climate challenges completely, the problem is we will not be able to produce any food anyway. So we don't really have a choice but to adapt and mitigate. So the Africa Climate Change and Resilience Development Strategy sets out a path for that. The Kampala Declaration, the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, has also done that as well. The Africa Blue Economy Strategy does that. The Africa Union Biodiversity Strategy does that. So as researchers, as development partners, we have this scaffolding of policy instruments that we can potentially work with. This is my last slide. I'm going to point at the lady over there, wave, Inga. She is the director of the Better Diets and Nutrition Science Program for CGIAR. I'm simply drawing attention here to the fact that we need to address consumer and food environments. We need to address our market systems. We need to figure out how we can do better with biofortification and health-enhancing staples. We need to think about end-to-end solutions for animal and aquatic source foods, for fruits and vegetables, to produce all that and address our nutritional requirements within planetary boundaries. We do not have a choice. We have to figure out how we do better. Dr. Richard Kuma said something about better livestock. And so all the ILRI people in here, your work has been cut out for you to figure this out. And on that, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Namakolo. We'll be calling Namakolo back to ask her some questions shortly. But first, one of the outstanding features of this report is that it included an enormous modeling effort. And we have two scientists here today who've been part of that multi-model effort. I think it was 11 different global food systems models. But what does that mean for those of us on the ground? Every citizen across the continent, it matters a lot. And underpinning that, what does it mean for livestock and animal source foods? So let me welcome from Cornell University, former ILRI staff, Professor Mario Herrero, from the Food Systems and Global Change team. Mario is a member of the EAT-Lancet executive leadership team, a commissioner, and he co-led the modeling group. And Daniel Masson de Croz, a senior research associate, also Cornell, who also co-led the modeling effort. So they're going to share with us some of this modeling work that underpins the report's recommendations, and then we'll have a chance to quiz them. So listen well, get your questions ready. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Shirley. I will start and then Daniel will continue to show some of the results. It is a real pleasure to be here at ILRI once more after, I don't know how many years, but yeah, so many recognizable faces that it's really a real pleasure to be here. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to tell you a little bit about what the report contained, and we're going to delve really into the main results of the modeling work that we did. But let's remember what we're trying to do here. This is really to try to identify a diet, a healthy diet that will be actually produced, processed, and distributed and consumed fairly within planetary boundaries. So we are facing a lot of, we're putting a lot of emphasis on the consumed fair aspect. We don't want to leave anybody behind. And one of the reasons why we're trying to do this is that in the first report, there were concerns about whether a healthy diet was affordable or not. So we included a lot on this topic from the first time around. So in this particular version of the EAT-Lancet report, we focused on 5 themes. Theme 1 on the healthy diet was the same as in the first report, but remember, this is really examining the diet from a health perspective. Just from a health perspective, perhaps putting a lot more emphasis on the reduction of risk factors for non-communicable diseases. And this is an important point in when we discuss the EAT-Lancet diet relative to the food-based dietary guidelines that probably don't go as further on the risk factors. So the risk factor element here becomes a really important thing. The food systems boundaries, well, we revised all the food systems boundaries and we included even more boundaries. In this report, we're covering 9 planetary boundaries, including aerosols and pesticides, and others that had not been covered before and that are really, really important for the food system. Justice in food system, we studied what are really the foundations of the social foundations of a just food system. And in reality, this goes back to rights issues. The right to a healthy diet, for example. Everybody should have a right to consume a healthy diet here. But for this, there are many things that really need to be included. There's new indicators that need to be produced and so on, and to be monitored to ensure that we don't leave anybody behind. We did a lot on the food system modeling ensemble, and in this particular report, the first one included one input-output model without explicit economics. In this one, we used 10 global economic models, all the same ones used in the IPCC, in the IPBES, in the UN Food System Summit, you know, the IFPRI impact and a range of others are parts of those. And these were a very diverse group of models because we needed to go through you know, what happened to agriculture, but also through employment effects, through income effects, and a range of others. And then we also focused on, well, what are the solutions? What do we need to do next? How do we start a food systems transformation? What are the options that we have there? So on the healthy diets, I just want to, this is the same slide that Namu showed. And fundamentally, make the vegetables and the fruits the star of the dish. That's the message. Eat a little bit of animal source foods, and by a little bit, you know, it's Walter Willett mentions a 1 and 1. It's 1 glass of milk per day plus 1 protein, 1 serving of beef per day, not per day, you know, per week. 2 servings of poultry per week. Then fish, eggs, and pork as well. So in reality, it's not that it doesn't contain enough animal protein, but you know, it's not about eating, you know, in every meal all those animal source foods. These are examples of the planetary health diet. The planetary health diet aligns very well with a lot of traditional foods and traditional eating patterns. So there's a very broad range of alternatives that people can actually consume. And these are actual photos of what could constitute good planetary meals. But I'm sure that many of you recognize some of these. Just to tell you, I'm really happy that Namukolo told us about the state of the state of Africa and its real remarkable problems of a multiple burden of nutrition, where we are seeing obesity rates really increasing, while at the same time there's a lot of undernourished people and there's a lot of people with micronutrient deficiencies. So the problem has changed significantly and will continue to do so because of income effects, because urbanization effects, because nutrition transition effects, that, you know, people will go for convenience, will go for ultra-processed foods and a range of other foods that will make it really difficult to deal with trying to identify a planetary health diet. This is the kind of scores that you see in all the countries. And we know that we could actually reduce by 15 million premature deaths per year if the planetary health diet was adopted. And that's a very significant amount of people. And you can see here the distribution amongst the countries. The planetary boundaries, Namukolo mentioned them. And here the fundamental thing that we did in the report was to revise the targets, but also be able to apportion the food system contribution that is actually very significant for some of the entities that you see here. So the task was, how do you actually produce that healthy diet for 9.6 billion people within planetary boundaries? But it was left open. We were not trying to do the modeling, trying to hit the planetary boundaries. Let's see if people can consume the diet, and let's have a look at the consequences on the environment. So it was left open just to be able to see, can we do it within planetary boundaries or not? Why was it structured like that? Because of the right to food. You know, you need the right of a healthy diet, and that's the predominant and most important thing that we were trying to obtain here. We have in the report many spatial data that you will be able to download and see, but this is an example of functional integrity of the ecosystems. We can see that in many places we are already exceeding that functional integrity in completely different biomes. So this is, we have for all the planetary boundaries maps like this. This is just an example for you to be able to have a look. Just to let you know that the three elements that we included were recognitional, representational, and distributional justice. Most people just focus on the distributional, which is the most obvious. It's very difficult from a modeling perspective to pick the distributional aspects. But, you know, there is a whole framework around, you know, identities, values, cultures, which are really fundamental here as well. And then who has the voice in the decision-making processes, which is essential. And then we went into trying to quantify these different domains with all the different models. We had a mini commission within the commission because this involved like 60 scientists from all over the world. And Daniel will actually take us through some of the scenarios that we ran and some of the main results.
Thank you, Mario. I'll try to give kind of a teaser of the different types of results, because ultimately we could have you sitting here for hours if we wanted to, and cutting out slides and things like that, but we're not going to do that. But I think one of the things that Mario mentioned, I think is really important, is what was the framing of the modeling that we did. So, and Namunkula also said this, the diet is not based on any environmental consequences. It's based on what is determined as a healthy diet. And so the framing of the modeling was, what would be the consequences if we achieved the adoption of the healthy diet by everyone? And so that was one of the key components of an EAT-Lancet food system transformation that we tried to model. But it's not the only piece. A lot of the attention in the first report was focused on the diet, which is a very important driver. But there's two other key components, which are increasing agricultural productivity and reducing food loss and waste. And it's really important that what we found in these studies was that no single component was sufficient to get us to all the planetary boundaries. And the bundle of those components are really essential, because some of these pieces have negative consequences towards the environment in some regions, and they also have potential consequences towards affordability of the diets. And so having those other components were really important about trying to balance some of those negative consequences into trying to maximize the benefits we see from a food system transformation. And so looking at this, on this slide, we have two different scenarios, which is a projection to 2050 as business as usual on the left, and then an EAT-Lancet. And if we look at first as a business as usual, what we see is the results here are for sub-Saharan Africa, with the little circle is the global number. And what we can see is globally, we see increasing agricultural production across basically all commodities by anywhere from about 30 to 50% by 2050. This is recognizing that we're seeing a population increase to 9.6 billion and assuming that there's a continued transition towards Western diets by 2050. What we also see is that the sub-Saharan Africa projections are substantially higher than the global average in terms of increase. And that's because the sub-Saharan Africa is looking at much larger population increases. In fact, most of the global population increase is going to be in Africa and South Asia. And so there's a recognition in these projections that these regions will need to increase production much more so than the global average. If we then shift towards the Lancet world, what we see is globally that circle moves quite a bit more towards the left. And what that really means is that basically at the global level, we don't need to have a whole lot of additional production if we were to shift towards a healthier diet and have increases in productivity. because we would end up having a shift away from high resource intensive foods and be able to then allocate those resources more effectively. But what we see for sub-Saharan Africa, which is different than most regions, is that the actual production numbers for sub-Saharan Africa in the two scenarios are not that different. And the reason is because we see such a large increase in population growth in sub-Saharan Africa and an expectation of continued economic development in the continent. So it's one of those things that like the averages can sometimes hide really important differences regionally. And it's one of those things that as we start diving deeper into these types of numbers, we'll start to get even more interesting sort of information to inform pathways of change at the country level, because there would likely be very big differences within sub-Saharan Africa if we start thinking about country context. Globally, what we see is all that increased production is only going to increase the pressure on the environment. So those slides that we already saw with that we're already transgressing on the environmental dimensions, that's only going to get worse in a business as usual scenario. And that's going to be on land, emissions, water use, nitrogen and phosphorus use. But what we see is that globally, if we do have this adoption of the diet with increased productivity and reductions in food loss waste, substantial reductions and easing of the pressure on all 5 of these dimensions, getting within the planetary boundaries for land use as well as emissions, but not quite getting there with respect to nitrogen and phosphorus reuse, even though we have substantial reductions, which suggests that we'll need to have more targeted interventions in terms of improving fertilizer use efficiency, perhaps the adoption of circularity, sustainable intensification, agroecology. There's a whole host of different solutions we'd have to think about. But what this highlights is that a healthy diet, which has lots of fruits and vegetables, also needs fertilizer if we're going to try to make that available to everyone in an affordable way. And so there's still tensions between achieving some of the environmental goals as well as achieving the health and justice dimensions. For sub-Saharan Africa, what we see, again, so the story here on the environmental side is one where the EAT-Lancet scenario doesn't see dramatic changes in terms of the environmental pressures in the continent, because we're still seeing substantial increases in production in sub-Saharan Africa, even in the EAT-Lancet diet. And so what this highlights is the real importance of continued investments and increased investments in agricultural productivity improvements, yield gap closures, and finding ways to improve natural resource use efficiency. What we see overall is that the different components of this food system transformation, the diet, increased productivity, and reduced food loss waste, they have different impacts into the different dimensions that we're looking at. And it's really important the role that increased productivity and reducing food loss waste has, not only on helping with mitigating some of the environmental components, but on helping ensure that the food that we can produce can be done affordably, as both of those drivers are key in terms of helping to reduce the price increases that might happen from a shift towards a healthy diet where you have a lot more consumption of relatively more expensive fruits and vegetables. And just to highlight the difference between another region, so this is Southeast Asia, where we don't have a projection of increased population the way that we do in Africa. We see that the adoption of an EAT-Lancet food system transformation would in fact have substantial reductions in environmental pressures. So again, highlighting the differences of different regions, what are the starting points, what are the things that we expect to change, and how it's going to be important then as we start developing regional pathways of change for food systems, sustainable food systems, we'll have to take into consideration those regional contexts. Just to give a little bit of a sense of what we're looking at in terms of the different projections for different commodities, what we see is, globally, dairy production in an EAT-Lancet world basically doesn't need to increase dramatically. It's more of a reallocation of where consumption and production has to happen. But in sub-Saharan Africa, we still see substantial increases in consumption, as Namankula was already showing that we may be consuming under the recommendations for dairy. For ruminants, what we essentially see is that production across the continent in an EAT-Lancet world is probably sufficient, but we need again to reallocate who's getting it, because there's overconsumption and underconsumption simultaneously. But then there's much more of a need in terms of figuring out how do we make that more efficient, how do we make that production less emission intensive, less land use intensive, more sustainable. We see similar stories in terms of what we're with coarse grains, which is cereals and maize and millet, continued increased production, a little bit less than under a business as usual, but still substantial increases. And as well with vegetable fruits and nuts, we need a pretty substantial increase in vegetable fruits and nuts to supply a healthy diet. Here is one of the challenges with the affordability is how do we increase that production of vegetable fruits and nuts in a way that that diet at the end of the day isn't unaffordable to a large number of people. And so this is one of the challenges that we see, in that increasing in productivity is really one of the main drivers in the bundle that we modeled, and one that we think is really critical to highlight. In regions with lower starting productivity, we really saw the importance of increased productivity in terms of mitigating some of that unaffordability concerns. In high-income countries, a healthy diet today is cheaper than the diets that we're consuming. So a shift to a healthy diet could save money in high-income countries, but in many low and middle-income countries, that's still not the case. And so a shift towards a healthy diet will put pressure if we don't have corresponding investments to make that less of a concern. And here then is kind of with the idea of different types of solutions that might be available. And of course, what solutions are chosen by region are going to vary dramatically based on the context we're working within. But it's recognizing that these pieces are all combined, they're all connected. We can't have one solution that solves everything. It's very much a holistic bundle approach, a nexus approach that's going to be necessary to be able to find and define pathways of change that get us to more sustainable, healthy, and just food systems. I don't know, Mara, if you want to go ahead. And so I think a couple of the main takeaways from what we did from the modeling is that the food production and consumption continues to be a major driver of planetary boundary transgression. The planetary healthy diet is very flexible, and so it can change quite a bit within different regions. With the modeling, for example, we were able to capture this somewhat, just recognizing that different cereals, different legumes are consumed in different regions. And so we were able to capture some of that. No single driver can get us all the way. And in fact, we found we still struggled with nitrogen and phosphorus in a food system transformation to get all the way to a safe zone. Regional transformations will differ greatly. Sub-Saharan Africa is still expected to grow as compared to other regions. How do we make this growth happen in a sustainable way? Can we leapfrog? Can we avoid the pitfalls of other regions? So we're already seeing increasing rise of obesity in Africa, but do we have to do the same stuff that we did in high-income countries with adoption of unhealthy diets, with all the negative consequences that come from that? Can we learn from, say, the energy transition, where we're leapfrogging legacy technologies to then adopt, solar power and not have to go back and redo all of the other steps that other development pathways have done? Can we do that in the food system? And finally, again, just the critical role of how do we increase the efficiency and productivity of the food system, that without doing that, we're going to really struggle in terms of achieving sustainable and affordable diets, and the role of food system innovation will be critical for achieving that. So thank you, and I look forward to questions.
Yeah, I'm opposed. So let me invite our three presenters to come and take a seat so we can quiz them. We just heard innovation is really critical. So let's see if we can unpack a bit. What does that actually look like? Now, we usually forget the people online, but I understand we do have a couple of questions. So maybe we could take those first, Michael, yeah?
So the first question is from Alamnea Daba, and he's asking, thanks, Namakulo, for the great presentation. What contextual and feasible interventions could we consider in future implementation, research to improve the inclusion of animal source foods in diets of Ethiopians, where inclusion is determined low? There's another question for, all three of them, I guess. In international knowledge and research domains, such as the livestock and dairy sector, there is a risk that interventions that are not yet planetary sound are tested, researched, and promoted. How could this reality be curbed towards planetary sound knowledge sharing practices? And this is from Nicole Metz. I think she's saying greetings to Namakulo from the from the Netherlands Food Systems Partnership. And then there's more of a comment, but issue, and I think it was brought up a little bit by Daniel, is from Genevieve LaRoche. Is the problem the high cost of healthy food or the ridiculous low cost of subsidized unhealthy food? And, and then a little bit more about how is it possible that soft drinks are still cheaper than milk, water, and fresh foods?
There you go. Namakolo, do you want to go first with that specific question? And then, are you Namakolo?
No, but I want to know.
Mine is on.
Okay.
Okay. I think that the question on Ethiopia in terms of consumption and of animal source foods is an important one. I think the intervention really here is using food-based dietary guidelines properly and ensuring that those that need to consume more know where to stop. The challenge now that we face is our aspirations for 350 grams of steak on your plate. Our aspirations should change to stop at a healthy consumption level, and food-based dietary guidelines will help us there. In terms of the religious perspective in Ethiopia, I think that then falls under, again, food-based dietary guidelines, but also remember there is the justice component that speaks to fairness and recognition of a different culture. And so if you look at the food-based dietary guidelines that were developed in Ethiopia, they actually take that into account. So that during fasting season, you need to advise on how could people consume differently to try and meet their nutritional needs. The other thing is with the food-based dietary guidelines in Ethiopia, there's also some elements of when they were being developed, the Orthodox Church leadership was actually part of the stakeholders that were consulted. So pregnant and lactating mothers are exempt from fasting during pregnancy. Small children below 7 years old, because of needing to address the stunting thing, they are also exempted. So there's an element of contextualization to the cultural realities of the country. So that's what I would say there, that food-based dietary guidelines are really the tool that we can use to both increase to the right amounts and also decrease for those that need to decrease. The testing of, was that for me also?
There was a second question that's for anybody. So if you have a quick comment on that while you have the mic.
I think in terms of testing the right interventions, this is where we really need our researchers to come on board, because it's researchers that will tell us about all the hogwash stories that go on the internet. The researchers can tell us what it can work and what doesn't work and stuff like that. And I think that's one way of responding to the EAT-Lancet report, is for researchers to really dig in and look through to see what is it that you might even already have under your desks and hiding somewhere in your publication that could be brought to the fore. That way we can test the right things and not be telling stories that don't necessarily help us.
So let's not be shy with the science.
No, not at all. Dig in.
And how many countries in Africa have food-based guidelines?
Yes, there are about 9 that have food-based dietary guidelines. Yes, but it is an opportunity though.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an opportunity because the rest of the countries will develop their guidelines in this new context of us worrying about food-based dietary guidelines and how much of what to eat and stuff like that. So for me, I look at it as an opportunity in a way because of when it is happening. It's also going to happen at a time when we've been talking about consuming traditional and indigenous foods, bringing those on board. So the most latest guidelines are the Ethiopia, Zambia, and Ghana ones. And you can actually see a difference in the way in which they have addressed both consumption levels as well as bringing on board traditional and indigenous foods.
Great. I like the opportunity framing. Mario,
Yeah,
you'd like
and
to come in.
yeah, I would also like to say that, you know, one of the things that we find is that there's many countries where
Is that working?
it's more or less, but let me.
The other one was loud.
Hi.
Oh,
Yeah, one of the observations from the report is that, you know, there's many countries that are on a trajectory of having to consume more. And
Yeah.
for those countries, it's relatively easier to, and they're closer to achieving an EAT-Lancet kind of a world or transformation. The key with those countries is how do we ensure that there's not an overshoot
Yeah.
after that? Because that overshoot, you know, that desire to consume the Western diet, you know, getting into all the ultra processed food, the overconsumption of meats, etc. That is really, really difficult. But we need to work on finding ways of ensuring that, well, once we've got there to the right levels, then, you know, we can actually stay there with a healthy diet for everybody and, you know, being produced as efficient as possible. There's a great role of technology to continue working towards increasing the efficiencies, but the key is not to overshoot. And, you know, for the second question also, I think that the days of, you know, of agricultural development projects just focusing on solely the livelihoods benefits are absolutely gone. That we need to actually consider environmental objectives at the same time, whether we are doing no harm, but ideally, if we can actually improve on the environmental outcomes, it is essential. That will
so
be.
it's not an either or.
It's not an either or. It has responsible development
Yeah.
now mandates that we actually focus on both people and planet.
Yeah, great. Daniel, there was a specific bit of that last
Yeah.
question for you. You got it, yeah?
Yeah, well, and I think it's absolutely true that a lot of the incentive structure that we have now is encouraging the consumption of an unhealthy diet. And this isn't just about the subsidies that are given to, you know, the inputs into processed food. It's also the fact that we have a substantial orientation of R&D that's geared towards increasing the productivity of those commodities and a historical underinvestment in improving the productivity of fruits and vegetables and legumes. And so it's really a whole of system reorientation, which I think is fundamental because the expectation of putting the responsibility of eating a healthy diet on every single individual is a recipe for it not happening. We need to create the systemic changes that encourage such that the healthy diet is the default diet. And so that means not only that we have the information from the food-based dietary guidelines, which critical to have that and that people can understand that it's communicated in a locally contextualized way. And some of the African food-based dietary guidelines are beautiful, like they have really great ways of presenting them that I think are quite compelling. But in addition to that, we also need to make it so that healthy foods are cheaper than unhealthy foods, and that will mean reallocating subsidies and taxes in such a way that that encourages that. But it also means trying to reorient our research and development and technologies to invest more heavily in the things that we need more of. And so some of that will be animal source foods as well. I mean, we didn't really talk about it very much, but really big increases in aquaculture would be needed to be able to achieve the healthy diets. How do we do that without putting pressures on our oceanic ecosystems? But also then fruits and vegetables, because we saw that one of the problems we had with achieving the environmental side on those was that we need fertilizers to increase the productivity of fruits and vegetables and to make sure that that's affordable. So we need to then invest to make sure that we can do that in a way that doesn't put more pressure. And I think that to me is a little bit going to Mario's and Namankulo's point about sort of the environmental incorporating that. every solution we have will have unintended consequences. So there won't be one that will magically do everything we want. And so we need to also invest a lot in monitoring so that we can see when things start to go off in a direction we don't want, so that we can start then to identify problems that we need to adjust in midstreams, because this will be an evolutionary process. We'll try to make some changes, it'll make some things better, some things will be a little bit worse, and we'll have to keep adapting and adjusting accordingly. So I think we're going to need to do a substantial investment in our monitoring capability to make sure that we can see that we're making progress, and where there are red flags that we quickly see them and do something about it.
Daniel, who do you see included in that we that you're talking about?
Well, I mean, hopefully it's going to need to be the science community needs to be involved in that heavily, but I think policy is going to need, civil society is very much a part of this. You know, we talk about having to do changes in subsidies and taxes, but that requires political capital. And so that means there's going to need to be communication with the public, and we need to be able to have sort of an agreement towards collective action. And so I think what makes this such a daunting challenge is that we need everyone on board. But then it also means we need to start then working towards trying to develop that kind of a collective vision. And on the one side from optimism, we're so far away from where we want. There's lots of small steps that we can do to start making things better today. Yeah, well, I mean, I think it is one of those where the end goal is really big, but there are lots of little changes we can do now that would make things better.
Excellent. Great. And that connection between diet and system seems to be really the piece that we need to give a lot of attention to. Let me ask, I see one here. I see Ian, and behind Aditi. One here. You can use the microphone.
Yeah, please use the microphone so the Zoom people can hear.
It's a little odd to ask a question without facing the speaker, so I'm going to try. I'm Purnima Menon. So glad to be visiting today to get this fabulous, be able to attend this. So one question I have is about, you know, even the vegetable and cereal and tuber products that are in the modeling right now. Are we considering the costs, the environmental costs of those only related to the production side versus what happens when they move through the value chains to become these other products, right? So a potato that's consumed at home, boiled and consumed at home, has a very different environmental cost. That's something that becomes potato starch and becomes Pringles and whatnot. How do you account for that? You know, what happens in the middle, even to
for the processing?
Yeah. The negative side of the processing of some of the vegetable type of products, even.
Thanks. Let's take the other two questions, Ian, and then Aditi.
Thank you, Shirley. A comment in a very specific question. I mean, first of all, I really want to congratulate the authors and the commissioners of this report. And I think there are two things which really strengthen it. One is the modelling work that Mario and Daniel presented, and the comprehensiveness of that modelling work, which I think gives the report a really solid basis. The other is the introduction of the concept of justice, which I think is really, really important. And agency is part of that. And as some of you may be aware, a few years ago, the high-level panel of experts for food security and nutrition, of which I stepped down as vice chair two weeks ago, added to the original 4 dimensions of food security, which were originally accessibility, affordability, utilization, and stability. They added the concept of agency as well as sustainability. And it's been interesting to see how that concept of agency over the last 4 or 5 years has really been embedded in lots of discussion about food security and nutrition. So congratulations to the authors for really putting justice at the heart of the report. And one comment on agency is that the high-level panel of experts, which I mentioned, has produced a number of scientific reports, which has been taken up by the Committee of World Food Security. So there's now actually quite a lot of information out there at the policy level to help governments and others to bring agency and inequality into the discussion. and along the lines that Daniel mentioned about getting communities involved, getting civil society involved, which is going to be absolutely, absolutely critical. But one very specific question, that although I haven't read every paragraph of the report, I've glanced at it and read bits of it. One very specific question, although there was recognition that since we're sitting in ILRI, that the relationship between meat consumption and cardiovascular disease in particular is different for unprocessed and processed meat. I didn't see a lot in the report about that. And it seems to be in the last 4 or 5 years, there's increasing evidence that you can't just lump all meat together. You have to look at the difference between processed and unprocessed meat. So my very specific question is, I didn't see that come out very clearly in the report. Maybe it did, and maybe it was in a paragraph that I missed. But if not, why not, given the increasing evidence that's been published in the last few years? Since we're sitting in ILRI, I had to ask that question.
All right, thank you. Aditi, quick question. We're pushing time here.
Yes, I'll be very quick. So again, congratulations. I've been hearing a lot about this report from Johan and others in the Earth Commission. In the Earth Commission, we keep discussing this particular report, and ours is coming next year, where we are discussing all the 9 planetary boundaries. I am one of the Earth Commission commissioners. So this is absolutely fascinating. I have a comment and a question. My first question is something I encounter all the time around Africa and population, but I suppose there were 2 things around it, that the most of the growth will happen in Africa is, of course, because of population, but also the base level consumptions are very, very low right now. So unless we make that apparent, it almost seems as if, like, we all know this in this room, but often it kind of lands in the public as, Africa would need more food because there are going to be so many people, but not that Africa is going to need more food because it isn't getting enough food even now. So I think maybe some kind of a narrative kind of that takes into account the current level of like severe underconsumption would be quite helpful for overall. But just what I feel from various fora where we always see African population somehow gets the blame, while the African underconsumption does not get as much attention. And my second question related to this was, I know this is, you focused on Africa today, so you didn't really tell us a lot around the overconsumption bit around it. So does the report make recommendations around how to reduce overconsumption? I know Mario touched a little bit upon how that might be harder perhaps than improving consumption. So does the report say that? Because for a lot of the global boundaries, the recent work by Kate Raworth and others on the donut economics actually shows that most of the boundaries have been breached by the richest countries compared to the poorer countries. So I think getting that in would be quite useful. Thank you.
Good. So you've got 4 questions from 3 people. One is about the processing part. We've got the processed and unprocessed meat. And then those 2 from Aditya about the nuance and what about the overconsumption?
I have the memory of
Really quick answer.
I have the memory of a fish. So can I start while they are actually fresh in my mind? Okay, so I'm going to.
I have to answer everything.
No,
Just
I'm going to go for Aditi's, which is, we actually focus on the most difficult trajectories are the trajectories of the countries that already, are over consuming a lot and a lot. The typical response that we get from those countries is that, but this will really be detrimental to our farmers. Perhaps we don't need to stop producing. Perhaps we should actually send all our products to Africa and to other places, which obviously, have a lot of disbenefits from a development perspective. But we do see a lot of the rich countries starting to build that kind of a narrative. And that would really need a very, very significant discussion, because, you cannot just get away with it by just doing the export route. Just imagine the consequences, even though environmentally there could be good reasons for doing so, because in those places are relatively very efficient at producing, animal products. But your other question around, well, African population, yeah, here what we see is that if you take the global results of the EAT-Lancet report, we do get reasonably within planetary boundaries at the global level. What we don't see for sub-Saharan Africa is that we get everybody consuming a healthy diet within planetary boundaries. And that is perhaps, you could say that that's a justice issue as well, perhaps more leeway if you want to consume a diet. But what we need to do is to actually deploy further novel technologies to really continue increasing productivity and continue reducing food loss and waste to make further inroads into these planetary boundaries. You saw from Daniel's environmental results, all the red that was in there, while not for Southeast Asia, for example, or for other regions. So that actually needs to happen.
Namakolo, the meat process done, or is that yours or where?
Yes. Let me quickly start with Aditi. The discrepancies in where the base consumption level is in Africa is the reason why I started with the Sophie slide, just to show where we are in comparison with other areas. We need to produce more, we need to consume more. There's always some nuances, especially at the individual level as well. In terms of the processed meat, the report does recognize the fact that processed meat is in a completely different category of its own. In terms of health risks, cancer in particular. So it is in there. It's not a whole 5-page thing, because there's only so much you can cram into a report and still have room for other things. But it's very clear on that. On the distributive bit, I can't help but to respond to this thing of if they don't have enough, let's sell them some. I think we need to be very careful, because agriculture is not just producing food. Yes, it is producing food, but it's also quite a major livelihood. So essentially, if we're just gonna buy the milk from wherever, where's the money to buy it gonna come from? Because the livelihoods are actually there in agriculture as well. So it's very short-lived to think about development as it's no longer important, because if we stop developing, I don't think the global north will have much of a market anyway, because we will be too poor to buy anything from them. Thanks.
So the global connection really.
The connectivity is there. We need to think about that connectivity.
We've heard about connection right on the ground to make this work. We're going to be quick. Are you going to talk about the processing question? I hope.
Yeah. No, so
Good.
I think one of the key aspects here for future work is definitely going to need to be looking more and more about the value addition in the supply chain. It's one of those where when you're doing something globally with this, you can't get kind of all the detail in terms of what you're getting with all the value chains and that we would like, because it really does make a huge difference, not just from an environmental perspective, but from a health perspective, right? Having dried fruit is very different than having a lot of sugar added to a fruit juice, right? And so it really is important to start thinking about that, because most people don't consume commodities, they consume food. And so that processing part is going to be really fundamental. There are aspects of it that we do capture to a certain extent. So certainly the value addition will increase the amount of energy use that's needed. And so there is some recognition that different types of value chains tends to be more energy intensive than others. And so, but this is also where we start getting into tensions with other goals, right? Reducing food loss waste probably means we need to find ways to increase cold chain access or alternatives to cold chain. That would increase our emissions from the food system. It would increase our energy demands. And so there are things here, which again, kind of goes back to that technology bit. But it's also with this idea of exporting. If we're going to export all of these things, we would have to have massive investments in new infrastructure to handle this. The port facilities for exporting fruits and vegetables is not the same as exporting soybeans. And so like there are a lot of things that we need to think about. And from a justice angle, it seems to be much more reasonable to invest in doing that yield gap closure and not having to worry about increasing food loss waste through sort of more extended value chains than it is to sort of do that. And so I think from a fairness perspective, it's really important to find ways that we can increase sort of the capacities of regional food systems, as well as just what that means for resilience as well. We want, you know, there needs to be a mix of both the global and the regional. And so it's important to find a balance in that respect.
Thank you.
One final thing that I
Really
want to
quick,
say,
Mary.
just super quick. One of the things that we did this time around was to create communities of practice, coalitions of actors. So we have, you know, from restaurateurs to scientists to people working in cities, policymakers, etc. So we've engaged them in a discussion, you know, for the last 8 months on what does this mean? And, you know, there will be contested actions, and these contested actions can actually be debated and solved in some of these communities. I think that if you are keen to participate, it would be really useful, because that's what we need, more dialogue for resolving the contested issues.
I can see hands and I would love to give a chance, but we're a little behind schedule. I don't want to mess that up, because particularly also the people online. So let me ask each of you to one word. What is the most important lever to make this change happen? One word. Two if you push it.
Dialogue.
Thank you.
Contextualization.
Good. Daniel?
Fairness.
Perfect. They did follow instructions. So you've given them a hand of thanks. Let's see if you can also follow instructions and take just 10 minutes. Bathrooms are out that way. Tea and coffee are at the back.
Sure, we have one other instruction that I was just informed of. We're going to have a quick photo outside here.
Okay.
Okay, so first, before the toilets and before the bio breaks, please come outside for the
Quick photo,
quick.
bio break, coffee, tea, whatever you need.
Thank you very much. So please come out over here.
Online, 10 minutes.
People online will be back in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
And he would always bring a box of Pringles. And he'd be like, listen, this is what creates jobs in the food system.
Outside for the. Let's go. Let's go. Great. Good. Nice.
Yeah, was that good?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Jared, but no, one of the change of mind that I find is very, but you know, in fact, the global dairy platform.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of. We can, you know, here's where we. Please come out. I discuss it. Photo.
Yeah. Oh, these are just coordinated.
What? Yeah, of course.
Let's go. Let's go.
1, 2, 1, 2. Hello. Ko much better kiasi. Sawa. Hello. Ko chini. Hello. Kwa mixer hapo ikoje? Iko sawa? Ah, sawa. Hata inaongelea mbali kiasi.
Take your seats, get your tea, coffee, have a seat so you don't miss this fantastic panel that's about to start. Please take a seat. Please pick up your tea, coffee, take a seat. We have a reception after our two panels, so you'll have a fantastic chance to continue these conversations that you're just getting into. So don't worry about not finishing it. You're going to have a chance. I hope we still have our online colleagues with us. So what we're going to do now for the remainder of this dialogue is to have two panels. One of them is going to look mostly at environmental dimensions, especially at the regional level. And the second will look more at health and nutrition, and more especially here in Kenya. So I'd like to welcome our moderator for the first panel, who is Laura Kramer, who I saw, but where is she? I'm welcoming her, but she's not here. Oh, there you are. Laura is a scientist in ILRI's Livestock, Climate and Environment team. And Laura, it's over to you.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Shirley. So let me invite the panelists up to join me up here. Let me first invite James Lomax from the United Nations Environmental Program. I think maybe he's still out of the room. Let me invite Wanjiro Kamau Rutenberg, who is on her way up. She's with the Alliance of Biodiversity in SIAT. Thank you so much. Bertha Mkandawire from AGRA, please join us up here. And Eric Fevre from ILRI, please make your way to the front. So, yes. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. So like Shirley mentioned, what we want to talk about in this first panel is exploring the trade-offs between environmental considerations and meeting demand at the regional level. So I want to pick up first with something we kind of ended the previous Q&A session with, and it's a little bit what we talked about over lunch. We had a nice lunch and discussed some of these issues together. And I feel like there's this tension between we want to help farmers have good livelihoods. We want to add value. We want to help them, process their commodities that they're growing into food. But at the same time, the planetary health diet is more about, eating whole foods, eating close to traditional diets. So I want to just start maybe with James and ask you, what do you see as some of those environmental concerns, and how do we maybe deal with some of those tensions between this need for value add processing, but also eating whole foods?
Thank you so much. You did introduce me.
Yeah.
I was in the toilet, thank you. Lovely to be here. Fantastic to have some of the authors here as well. And very good for people that have busy jobs to have the report highlighted at the start. So thank you so much. I'm not sure whether to answer to your question or to bring the thoughts that I had from the interventions that I heard first. And I don't know what to do. What should I do? Okay, because I think there are undoubted trade-offs, unintended consequences when it comes to trying to achieve what the report sets out we need to achieve for planetary health. The first thing I think is that it makes an assumption that coming from a dietary perspective is going to have you know, chains of positive impacts back up the supply chain. And I don't know whether that is a given. I think we can understand that, and there are a few words that I saw in there that I really worry about, things like ecological intensification. I don't know what that means. So it'd be good to break that down. What does it mean? I don't really know. In my experience, intensification is rarely good for the environment. But it's great for efficiencies, and it's great for getting very, very cheap protein out there. But the question is, do we really need cheaper and cheaper protein? So that's the first thing. The second one is that, is it Daniel? Is it, I don't know. You spoke about we, and I think someone said, what does we look like? Oh, it was you, Shirley, wasn't it? And one of the jobs that I have in UNEP is trying to bring things into reality, because ministries of environment are often underfunded. They're often not really mainstreamed in conversations at the country level. So we want to bring things to reality. So how do we bring science to reality? And the reality is that the we has to talk about the private sector. It's the private sector that produces the food, processes the food, markets the food. And I'm not going to pick up my phone, but it's something like we did a report, UNEP did a report in July where we highlighted the importance of working with the private sector, because the ship has sailed, that research and government makes the agenda. That ship sailed a long time ago. So I think we have to have a bit of a reality check. And for example, 40%, so 10 companies move 40% of all commodities produced. 4 companies produce 50% of seeds. 4 companies produce 66% of agrochemicals. And fertilizer is a lot less, but it's dominated by certain countries. So I think we have to get a real dose of reality in, if we want to see transformation, speak to the right people. Research has their role, government has their role, but if you want innovation, you have to start working with the private sector, because they are the real innovators in this space. So that wasn't mentioned once, so that has to come to the fore. And then the third point that I wanted to make is around this idea that the food system is locked in, right? So our economic system drives, the lock-ins drive why we produce and consume in this way. And the first thing is this need for constantly cheap protein, right? And someone spoke about the fact that there are subsidies onto commodities that create the cheaper feed that drives cheaper protein. So it's all very well that we say, oh, look, we've got to have more veg and this and that, but unless we deal with these very, very systemic issues, we can't. So that's the first thing. The second thing is market concentration, which I just touched on. Market concentration from a kind of an intellectual perspective seems like a bad thing, but when we look at the opportunities that might be there to drive actual change, market concentration could be a good thing. So are we prepared to roll our sleeves up and get to the nitty-gritty with trying to get and understand how these massive conglomerates produce and make us consume our food? And then the last point is that the investment pathways in our food systems are so entrenched that, again, unless we address this idea that working with the people that own these assets, there's no way that there's going to be any change, because no one wants billion-dollar stranded assets. So I think great report, really interesting. But what we need to do is we need to have a dose of reality to understand, okay, so how do we really do this today in 2025? Thank you.
Thanks, James. I think those are some hard truths that you've brought out for us. I want to take it over to Wanjiro, because I know that with the Alliance, your team here in Africa is doing a lot of work with accelerators, helping businesses start up kind of climate smart entrepreneurship ideas. So do you have thoughts for us around how do we counter what James has talked about in terms of this lock-in, this monopoly? How do we kind of stimulate the global we, but some of these small businesses who can maybe help with growing more fruit and veg, distributing better in urban areas? Do you have some thoughts around that?
Yes. The problem is I have a few too many thoughts. So I'm struggling to get them all organized in my brain. So let me answer that question and also then share some other thoughts. Yes, private sector is important, and engaging private sector is going to be really critical moving forward. I really liked how Apollinaire opened the session calling us advocates and invoking activism. And towards that, I also am thinking a lot about what advocates and there's been this invocation of justice and civil society and the work of civil society, which from a personal perspective is the lineage that I come to this work from. And so those invocations really, really resonate with me. I think we also have a task in front of us to imagine a different future. And here I'm speaking as an African looking at this work from an African perspective, not a global one, from Africa looking out into the global. On one hand, we decry that global multinationals are not paying attention to Africa. We are such a blip on their bottom line, and we decry that. But I actually think that's an opportunity for us because we are not as locked in as a continent to these global food systems. And that in that absence of global, I think the last time I was looking, Nestle's biggest business in Africa is Maggi cubes. That's the thing they sell us. Whereas what they sell in the US is a whole lot more. What they sell in Europe is a whole lot more. In that, our absence from their bottom line lies Africa's opportunity to support our agribusinesses to bring an African imagination to what food systems, private sector-driven food systems could and should look like. That may end up being major conglomerates or may not. That may end up, we're 54 different countries. What does a decentered food system that then focuses, for example, and here, join me in imagining a different future. Join me in imagining food systems driven by private sector that valorize indigenous foods. We've seen, for example, here in Kenya, what we've been able to do with green leafy vegetables. When I was growing up, it was impossible to find managu anywhere in the market. I think you had it for lunch here today. That has been, in my lifetime, a huge shift in diets when it comes to the production, consumption, and value chains of green leafy vegetables here in Kenya. What might that look like when expanded continent-wide to other indigenous and traditional foods? I think we do have an opportunity here. We were talking earlier today, and I said, I try and use my Mondays, I call them Pollyanna Mondays. Mondays are the days I'm optimistic, and I think we can fix the world's problems. By Wednesday, I'm as pessimistic as the rest of them, and by Friday, I need a day off. But my Pollyanna Monday today tells me we actually can fix this, but it calls for imagination. It calls for research, private sector collaboration. A couple of other things that while I still have the mic, I love the conversation about justice. And again, I want to echo to the authors of the report, I want to echo the congratulations of bringing that justice lens to the conversation. But I also want to remind us that these questions of justice, and when we look at that data and look at North America and the food security, let us please not forget those who are food insecure in North America itself, because the solutions for Africa are not going to be independent of the solutions of those who are insecure in the belly of the beast, if you will. The challenges of distribution. So, and here's why I'm saying that. When you look at what U.S. food security policy or U.S. food policy has said, and we were talking about importing food. So, we want to keep our farmers in production, so let's export the extra dairy, and here I'm thinking about cheese. Any of you who've listened to any hip hop music know about cheddar and the ways that cheddar is used in the US inner city communities as currency because of US overproduction of dairy, turning it into cheese and then using that cheese to feed as food aid in poor inner city communities in the US. Those problems, if we are not careful and if we don't understand the questions of justice in rich countries, we are bound to replicate messed up solutions for ourselves here. And so the same way we are struggling, and Namukolo really talked about overnutrition, obesity, the same way the wealthiest amongst us are over-consuming red meat and creating the problems of non-communicable diseases. Those same problems are the same problems in the US. Those are the same problems Europe is facing. And so the conversation about justice also needs to start looking at socioeconomic status, the wealthy versus those who don't have. And I think that's a global conversation. So even as we dissect this conversation as a regional one, the North versus the South, or the West versus the rest of us, let's also see where there are similarities between those who are over-consuming and the structural similarities between those who are driven to overconsumption and structural similarities with those between those who are under-consuming in Africa and also driven to underconsumption in the West.
Thank you so much. I want to take that idea of not replicating, not following, kind of avoiding the pitfalls of industrialized systems. And I want to go to Eric. You are one of the commissioners of the Lancet One Health report. So can you talk to us a little bit about where are the overlaps? What do you see as similarities? And what can we learn reading both of them in tandem in terms of production and human health and animal health and environmental?
Thank you. Yes, so the Lancet's One Health Commission reported earlier this year. It was a 6-year-long commission process which spanned the COVID pandemic. And so there was a lot of soul searching inside that commission around the impacts of all of that, because One Health, for those who aren't up with that type of lingo, is really thinks about the interdependence of humans, of other animals, of plants, and then the other biotic and abiotic elements in the ecosystems that we all share. And disease transmission is one of the big parts of that. It's often a big focus of One Health, but not the only one. With the context here, so the Lancet One Health Commission had a specific chapter on food systems and actually referenced the original EAT Commission. And there are a lot of, I would say, synergies. I don't think I was looking for areas of conflict between the two reports so I could say something juicier, but actually they're largely in step with each other on the environmental impacts of the food system in particular. But there are two things, I guess, I would want to say that link a little bit to what we've heard already. And it actually comes back to the issue of the commercial sector. So and what I want to say there is that there are really two very different commercial sectors that I perceive here that have a big impact on the food system. The one is big food, and their very, let's say, extractive approach to food production and to profit making, whatever the consequences on the populations who consume that food. And I think it was an FAO statistic that showed that the $12 trillion of costs associated with the extractive and destructive aspects of the global food system, 8 trillion of those dollars relating to ill health of humans who consume that food. Okay, that's actually more than the food system is worth as a whole altogether. So we're doing more damage to ourselves than good in producing industrialized food. And in the One Health Commission report, there's a lot of talk around the financialization of the food system, which is really taking away the agency, to use the word that Ian used earlier, taking the agency away from those producers and putting it in the hands of really few people who then control what our children eat and what the children in all continents are eating. And that's a very dangerous situation. The other element of the private sector here is a kind of completely the opposite end of the private sector, and that's individual farmers. And I think we mustn't forget that farmers are business people. Or rather, if they want to be successful, they think like business people, and their farms are a going concern. And that engages them in a system which requires them to change the way that they think about their production and their impacts. If you are a farmer who wants to be successful in 21st century Kenya, you're not just producing food for your family, you're producing for the market. And that changes everything about the way you think about how you farm, how you connect with the populations who eat your food, and changes really the environment around the whole farming system. So for example, it creates new interfaces in the farm because you maybe are expanding your production, or you're maybe doing things in a slightly different way, so that that piece of forest over there on the edge of your farm suddenly becomes part of your farm environment. And it means that your farm and your animals on your farm in particular are interacting with the wildlife that lives in that environment. And that creates additional risks, which don't have to be risks if they're well managed in terms of diseases that might emerge out of that system. It also forces you to think about new inputs into your farming system. I particularly want to point at, there's been a lot of talk about poultry today, in particular, the use of antibiotics in the poultry system in order to maintain the high levels of production that people want to maintain in order to keep feeding the market. And that has a lot of additional risks in terms of the development of antibiotic drug resistance and secondary risks in terms of human disease. And thirdly, a massive complexification, if that's even a word, of the system around which food moves from the farm to the consumers. And that means there are all these new actors for these kinds of smallholder farmers who are engaging with a globalized food or with a more systematic national food system. So let's take slaughterhouse workers, for example, who by and large are still working in an informal sector environment, but are producing food on a scale that's semi-commercial, slaughtering animals with no protective gear and exposing themselves to a lot of additional risk. So I guess these are the kinds of additional things that come beyond the food itself, beyond this commission, where there's interaction with the Lancet One Health Commission, where all these elements of change really have to be thought about and brought into the story and require a careful management, I guess I would say.
Thanks so much, Eric. I want to come to Bertha now. You were telling me that AGRA is doing some really interesting work with identifying country priorities, supporting country priorities for different activities, for different commodities, but trying to bring a nutrition element into it. So let's come back to kind of the dietary aspect of the EAT-Lancet report. What are some of the best practices you've seen in terms of helping countries think about not just, stimulating avocado exports, but trying to get those diets for the people growing those avocados to improve and to align better with what's being recommended here?
Thank you very much. Okay, so as you are aware, AGRA as an institution, we are mostly operating in the crop space. And for a long time, that's what we have been doing. But recently, AGRA recognized that working across almost 15 countries, 15 governments, and with the ambition to reach about 29 million farmers to work with, that's a big reach. The question was, where is nutrition in all this? So AGRA designed a unit called Nutrition Sensitive Agriculture, where I am the head. And what we basically do is we look at our investments that we are making within the crop production, and we ask the questions, where are the opportunities and where are the threats? Because that's where the trade-offs are coming. We want to produce so much, on whose time. If you are working, for example, with a smallholder farmer, a woman, on an acre, on a hectare of land with very, very archaic mechanization, she'll take a lot of time to do her work, right? This is the mother. She has to cook food for the family, for the children. Now, what are the trade-offs she's going to make? So those are the kind of questions that we are increasingly asking as AGRA in our investment. If this investment goes out to produce the food we want, what is the cost of this production on child nutrition? So we start looking at the time use of the mothers. We're looking at the way they're producing the food. Is this the right seed? Is this gonna bring more returns? So we start investing in the seed, for example, nutrient-dense seeds that are also climate resilient, because we want them to produce, but not every year and maybe twice a year doing the same thing. We want them to be able to produce food that they can also have in the house to bridge the seasonality gaps. A lot of African countries are faced with seasonality gaps. They have food in one season, they have no food in another season. So we're looking at the seed systems. How are they supporting nutrition as well as productivity? Even sustainable farming, we have moved very much as AGRA into sustainable farming and climate resilience. We have just launched a program, we call it REGAIN, where we are looking at food loss reduction. And one of the components, which is nutrition, and that's the good thing of having nutrition-sensitive agriculture, is that if you are going to promote whole food consumption, for example, it's one method of reducing food loss, but also promoting health. So as I was saying, we are looking at everything we do. We have markets. We have inclusive markets, trade and finance. The question we ask is, are the markets able to supply the nutrient-dense foods that people want? If someone goes to the market today, they have the money, are they going to find that food? Remember that as a continent, we have really undiversified over the years. We are now talking about 3-4 crops, main crops. The vegetables are produced in very low quantities, the fruits in very low quantities. So our diets on this continent are increasingly very much staple. I think maybe 60% of what we consume is staples. And looking at that, as AGRA, it's very easy for us to supply that food, to support farmers to produce, but we draw back and we ask ourselves questions like, is this food enough? Remember, Namkoro talked about the dietary guidelines. So now we are developing a nutrition strategy for AGRA. We were being guided by the dietary guidelines for some countries, but now with this report, we are drawing back again and looking at this report to say, what can we get from this report? At the same time, there are many other reports. The OECD just launched their own report on how markets are supporting diets in West Africa. Increasingly, more people are consuming more and more processed food. So how do we draw a line between markets performing, at the same time making sure that people are getting nutritious food? But we're also working with policies, with governments. So our policy and state capability, we are actually looking at how are we supporting governments make their investment. Remember, African governments work with what they call flagships, big flagships of rice, big flagship of maize. Now we are, as AGRA, we are increasingly looking at that and challenging that to say, what if we have big flagship of horticultural crops? What if we introduce more and more? And then you have these opportunity crops which are proving to be very nutrient dense and are going to replace certain micronutrients that we are taking from supplementation. You can actually get from these foods. How are we bringing all that? So I think as AGRA, when we looked at this report, we also did an internal one. We looked at the report, we identified pathways that we could support the report, and we realized that there's a lot that we can work with. Consumer awareness is part of the work that we are going into with the farmers as well as with the market actors. So, because for people to adopt, people are not animals, right? If you are working with an animal, you can constitute something and premix and everything and give an animal it will eat. Humans don't work like that. No matter how much we can prescribe or say or advance, they'll still have choices, free will. So how do we work around that free will of making food choices on the market to make sure that the process itself is sustainable, but also giving people a lot of information to understand, if I'm consuming this, what are the consequences? I think the knowledge gap is also something that we really need to bridge and bridge very fast, because it really determines how people make food choices. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I love, and I hope Namukolo and Mario, you heard AGRA is looking at this report. They are thinking, how can they use it when they are working with countries? So I really like that. I want to just end with each of us kind of giving one or two thoughts, you know, where else can this report be used? What do you think? Of course, it's complex. There's no silver bullet, but what's one thing each of you kind of hopes that this report gets from the research, from the knowledge into the action? Where do you want to see it go? Let's start with Eric and then come down.
Thank you. I guess if it had to be one word, I'd say governance. To not for, I guess, governments, but others also to not allow this to just be random. We have to plan for this future. And I think that's really what this report is saying. We have to think through the future that we want to have. And that requires us to have a level of governance that allows decisions to be made and sold to the consuming public to buy into. Yeah.
That's excellent.
I would follow with that. Follow that with specificity. That Africa actually needs support to adopt sustainable systems without compromising development. Really, we need to invite the highest emitting countries to shoulder the burden on reduction. And we as Africa need to take up all the space possible and available to craft our own specific responses. And that specificity is not only at country level, but the differences between urban, peri-urban, and rural food systems. To what she's saying around AGRA's work, there's a level of specificity that we must step up to as Africans as we engage with this report.
I think as we're putting this report into context, African context, we are also going to be able to understand that we're working, for example, with the CADIP, the New Kampala Declaration. How do we get this report there in the declaration and make it a member state owned? How do we make sure that some of the indicators, what kind of indicators are we going to generate from this report that can make it to the BRR, biannual review report, report that the African Union shares with us? I think that's very, very important. And then the policies, the government policies. Different governments are at different policy cycles. How do we bring these recommendations in our context, that is, to feature in that, so that as the government is prioritizing investments and flagships, they start looking at, okay, what are the priorities for us beyond the money that we want to generate? Yeah.
I'm so glad I have another. I realized I was a little bit negative when I first came in. It was all about, no, it's not about, it was all about the problems that I feel we face and the barriers that are there. Now, are there solutions? Of course there are, right? So what we do at UNEP is that our entry point are the multilateral environmental agreements. So that is the Paris Agreement, those are the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Just by way of show of hands, does anybody know or has ever even read the Kunming Montreal Biodiversity Global Framework? I've said it wrong, the Global Biodiversity Framework. Okay, all right. So that's probably a good 15%, all right? This is possibly the most comprehensive food systems framework that has been almost 100% agreed. There are a few countries like America that didn't ratify it, but it's almost, I mean, it's a good 100 and I can't give a figure, but it's many, many countries that have ratified this. This is now a priority for government. It's a priority for the Global Environment Facility. There's a new biodiversity fund. UNEP has just put in quite a lot of work, and we've been successful in gaining funds to work on food systems transformation in countries using the Kunming, the Global Biodiversity Fund, and the NBSAPs as an entry point to, and this is my last point, to connect national food systems pathways, which are contextual living documents. I'm not going to give a show of hands on that. I'm really scared who will put their hands up. So you've got the National Food Systems Pathways, you've got the NBSAPs, you've got the NDCs, the National Determined Contributions. And then I think this methodology and this report can help us to give a consumption angle and a dietary angle. And I'm happy to do that in 8 countries that we have starting in January. And those are 4 SIDS, 2 countries in Africa, the Caucasus and Asia. So again, it gives that really important different angle to connect. How do we get people to eat better? But at the same time, then how does that in a very, very nitty-gritty way and practical way relate to nature positive farming? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the panelists. Please join me in thanking them. Back over to you, Shirley.
Great panel. I hear lots about context being important and us in this continent taking a responsibility to make that context really come alive into actions. Let me now welcome the second panel, which is going to explore a bit more the health and nutrition aspects, particularly here in Kenya. I'm going to welcome our moderator, Sylvia Alonso, who is a principal scientist in ILRI's health team. Although we're talking about Kenya, Sylvia is actually based in the Philippines, but her panel is from here. Over to you.
And I know Kenya really well, so it's a pleasure. Good afternoon, everyone. So yes, we wanted basically to contextualize this discussion with the example of a country, and given we are in Kenya, we thought it's nice to gather with a group of people from Kenya working in Kenya to see what does this mean for them. So basically, we're gonna get real now. And for that, I have a fantastic panel. Let me welcome my 2 panelists in the room, Dr. Zipporah Bukania from the Kenya Medical Research Institute, KEMRI. Dr. Kip Kemoy from Cairo, yes. And then unfortunately, Gladys Mugambi will not be able to be with us. She's fallen sick, unfortunately. But we have a panelist online. So can you please give us on the screen, Mr. Kennedy Kago? I hope he's around. All right, so the central room, just try to find our panelists and bring it in the screen when you can. Well, welcome both. Oh, so you want me to sit in the middle, or how is this? Okay. All right, good. So I wanted to start this panel by contextualizing the Kenyan diets. But I think Namukolo did that really well already at the beginning of the session. So I don't think we have to go through that. Yeah. Oh, he's there. Okay. Can he hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Fantastic. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I think what we learned from Namukolo is even if you look at the Kenyan diets, they are off in all indicators in terms of the type of foods that they are eating. For most of them, they are consuming less on average, less than they should. For some of them, maybe a bit too much. So we are off. But what I wanted now then to move on from that is health. And there's also, I'm turning to Zipporah now. There's a trend on health that is quite worrying. So the statistics show that the incidence of non-communicable diseases have been increasing quite drastically in Kenya over the past 2 decades. So from the 2000s, if you look at the graphs, it's quite remarkable. A very flat line, and then you have this spike, enormous and very fast growing line for things like cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and diabetes. So Zipporah, those non-communicable diseases are definitely multifactorial. But in Kenya, what are the drivers? And in particular, what is the role of diet on those statistics?
Thank you, Sylvia, and good afternoon to everyone. Morning, those who are online, different time zones. I think, let me start from where Namukolo left in terms of the statistics and just probably build a little bit more on that and say that at the moment, I think the Ministry of Health is recording the highest admissions and deaths from non-communicable diseases. And when I say highest, is because we are now reporting at least 39% of the deaths in the facilities have a relationship with NCDs. And which are the big NCDs for Kenya at the moment? We talk about diabetes, hypertension, we have cancer, and cardiovascular disease. Those are the top list. And I think that aligns very well with what we heard from Namkole, that it's really those are the drivers of the NCD space right now. But I think what is worrying is that the projections shows that by 2030, we'll be talking about 55% of NCDs coming from this region. And even a more worrying trend is that 53% of the NCDs are now affecting the 40-year-olds and below. So a number of questions maybe we need to ask ourselves, then what is driving this? And when I was serving my tea, I asked one question. What are we eating behind there? How many of us are eating more than 1 meal per day, every snack, every minute? So one of the drivers is the environment. If we were not in this sitting place, I'm sure some of us will not have had the samosas and the cookies at the back there, right? So the environment is critical, and it's really driving this. And I think for Kenya, the fact that we have a devolved government is also driving a lot of urbanization to the remotest part of the country. Because what devolution does is it brings resources from the national to the county level. People are moving away from the cities to try and make a life out of, the communities in the village. But because there's devolution, it also means there's more money circulating. And so our lifestyles are changing based on exposure to the resources that are available to us. If you travel around this country right now, there's construction literally everywhere. If you look at what people are consuming during construction, you will pick one or two things that are, as a result of the environment, they're actually driving the increase in NCDs. So if somebody who works in industrial area and commutes all the way from one of our largest slums, Kibra, but they still have hypertension, and we keep saying physical activity is the solution, right? So why do they have hypertension if they've been walking every time, morning and evening they do walk? Because of the other environmental factors that are exposed, which have to expose them to food. I think there was a mention about school meals, and I think that's another area that is really driving the NCD story up, because school environments are also very high opportunity for foods that are actually not the best for the school children. And it's because the system, the way it is set up to handle school feeding programs, it is not standard for every child who can't afford food. So for those who can't afford to pay the school meal or contribute to purchase of the school meal, then they're forced to be given resources to buy whatever is available. And of course, the private sector, which is the marketers of the non-preferred foods, those are the cheapest, and they'll make them available. The other thing I think is our lifestyle, the way we are operating basically. I don't know where you were, the rest of you, before this meeting at 2, but where I was seated the whole day since 9 o'clock. And I broke off at 1 and came here to sit from 2 o'clock to 5. And then from here, I'm going to sit into my car and I go home. So when I get home, I'll be so tired. And what happens? Sleep, no exercise. So again, those are lifestyle issues that I think we can try to work on to try and manage our lifestyle. Now, I think we have seen from what has been projected, for example, in this country, that we do know the causes of NCDs. I don't think it's anything new even for us who are sitting in this room, and we are contributing to it because we are doing exactly the things we shouldn't be doing. The question is, what is it that we can do to make sure that this process or these problems do not continue to get worse? The diets, of course, are playing a big role. So the question is always, what is the right diet? And what does it cost to have a right diet? While we push for vegetables and fruits, consumption is one of the best. We talk about physical activity, cessation of smoking. I don't think that's new to anybody in this room. But what is it that is stopping Kenyans from getting done, and probably the rest of the world as well? Our policies. I think we have very good policies in place, but I think implementation is a problem. Kenya right now has the Nutrition Action Plan. And in the Nutrition Action Plan, they have a Kenya Result Area number 2, which literally talks about prevention, management, and control of non-communicable diseases. The documentation is approved, it is signed by the Ministry of Health. How is it implemented? It requires a lot of effort, monitoring, resources to push it through. We do have guidelines for management of cancer, diabetes, hypertension, and they have all been developed by very key experts in the Ministry of Health who have put these documents out there. They may happen to be implemented in very high level facilities in the city, but is there any system in place that we can monitor to see the implementation? Because a lot of this really is, can we implement this and make it possible? Recently, the ministry developed nutrition profiles for Kenya, and they're actually available online. You can Google them and just download that. And really trying to see how can we measure, understand the foods that are available to us and the nutrient content that is displayed on the food products that we buy, and whether it's really what we require or it is more than what we require. Again, that requires a lot of concerted multi-sectoral implementation processes. We cannot do it as a sector in health alone. We do need agriculture, we need trade, we need the guys in the legal system, because a lot of these will cause a lot of law-related suits because of the environment that you are stepping in. You are breaking down people's income by stopping them doing what they're doing. So again, in terms of implementation of our documentation, we have very good documents, but we need them to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Zipporah. And you do mention, I mean, all that, of course, is relevant, but I want to go back to something you said. We are all highly sensitized to this topic. We are still not doing what we are supposed to do. We are still indulging the biscuits, and we are still keep sitting all day and not doing sports. So can you tell me one or two things that maybe have been tried in Kenya to change human behavior? And perhaps let's focus on food choices. Huh? And we know it's driving, but for environment, in our lifestyle. Are there examples of things that have been tried to modify consumer choices and consumer behavior around diets?
Thank you, Sylvia. So through the Ministry of Health, they do have a Department of Health Promotion. And while they're not as active as they should, I think they've made some efforts to develop documents and guidelines on community-based information in terms of food choices. In the recent past, when the president gave provisions for task shifting, so shifting tasks from nurses to community health promoters to come in and try to support that health sector, many other components, but nutrition was one of them. So they have put that into place, and I think it's more of how can they be empowered more to reach the communities a little more and get that information. However, from project-related studies, we've also done some work that we can confidently say with a lot of interventions to the communities, you can actually reduce some of these challenges. One of those is early detection. How many of us, maybe we are lucky you probably have no choice but to go for a medical check before your insurance. So that gives you a better space. But a lot of people don't get to know what they're going through until they have a crisis and they're in admission. That's when they discover they've suffered maybe high blood sugar for the last 6 months or so. So we did have a project, what we called a feasibility project as a research institute, and we did this in the western region of Kenya. So we initiated a project called Hekima. Basically, those are called health kiosks. And so what happened is they put kiosks, build kiosks. And I say kiosk, I mean exactly what a kiosk looks like, a little room like this in different market centers. What was put in those kiosks was, one, to train community health promoters, two, to have nurses who manage those particular centers. We didn't need a doctor, we didn't need a clinical officer. We just needed basic support to the communities to ensure that they get some early detection of the different NCDs. So these kiosks were manned by the community health promoters, and during market days, you'll get a number of the community members actually coming to the kiosks to take their blood pressure, their sugar, their weight. They're told what they are at. They get some basic nutrition information, and in critical cases, they're actually referred to the health facilities within that particular county. And that had a very good impact because the county then took up that initiative and said, we think this is a
good way to have preventive measures in place. So those are some of the things that we have actually tried to put in place. And I think now that is expanding beyond that particular county, but also to note that the county now took up that as an initiative. So our hope is that we can do this, replicate this in different parts of the country, and ensure that people pay attention to early detection and get the right information at the right time.
That's right. So with early detection is an opportunity to then intervene and even give education around what a healthy diet is. Well, I want to now turn to our panelist online, Kennedy, because I want to now move from health to the other big topic here, which is livestock. So the EAT-Lancet report does acknowledge that livestock products are a very important source of nutrients and vitamins and many elements for good health. But it also acknowledges that some livestock products may be associated with environmental impacts, may be also not so healthy in the long run. So basically it recommends that consumption should be limited. And also when we look at the projection as to what is the impact of that into the future of the livestock sector, it seems to be that we shouldn't see a big growth over the next few years. So from the, Mr. Kennedy Kago, I forgot to say, he's from the Kenyan Livestock Producers Association. So when you hear these messages, Mr. Kennedy, what comes to your mind as the representative of the Producers Association?
Okay, thank you, Sylvia. And just to say, I'm from Kenya Livestock Producers Association, which is an organization that has membership of farmers, farmer groups, cooperatives, community-based organizations, and other stakeholders that are involved in livestock agribusiness. So when we hear about these messages, some of them trying to limit the role of livestock in diets, what we see is that it's a bit misplaced. One, because livestock-derived foods provide high quality proteins that cannot be substituted or that cannot be matched from plant-based proteins. Proteins from milk, eggs, meat, they are very high quality and you cannot get the same from plant-based foods. So and actually when you see nowadays, when you see online people discussing, I think there is also another shift as people become more health conscious. There is also a bit of debunking of the myths that have been there. And as people become more health conscious, there is a push actually towards more consumption of livestock-based products, whereby you find those who are doing the fitness, they encourage people to consume more eggs, more meat, and do away with more of the starches and carbohydrates. So we see a shift towards that. But also when we look at it in the Kenyan context and in a broader perspective, is that there is not really competition between livestock and plant-based foods, because about 60% of the livestock population in Kenya is in the ASALs, and these are areas where most of them are unsuitable for production of crops. And therefore, the livestock really provides a means of livelihood for these communities that are based in these ASALs. And they're able to sustain themselves either through the incomes they get through sale of livestock products, and then they can also purchase food and also consume some of the things that they're using. But also there is a bit of complementarity between the two. For example, livestock also contributes to the production of healthy plants in terms of its contribution to soil fertility. We all know use of manure in enhancing soil fertility, and therefore we see livestock, especially in mixed farming systems, complementing the production of crops, and also assisting in recycling of the crop residues and food wastes. Livestock really does play that role. And therefore, we see that livestock will continue contributing to healthy and sustainable diets in the country. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for reminding us that indeed we really cannot forget the context and the differences in different settings. So thanks for reminding us of that, and also the livestock, the positive livestock contribution to the overall food system. But I think all in all, I think everyone acknowledges, and I'd like to hear if you agree with this, that all in all, the livestock sector needs to become more efficient and by and large, more sustainable from an environmental point of view. You've given us some examples of the positive contributions of livestock production to the environment now on these mixed livestock crop systems and the rest. What are other examples of initiatives that the livestock producers in Kenya are putting in place to become more sustainable or to have limited or less environmental impact? We heard this morning, we don't want less livestock, we want better livestock. So how are we making livestock better in Kenya? Any examples?
Yes, we can summarize. I can list maybe 2 or 3.
Yes.
And one, we do agree that we need to really reduce the environmental impact of that livestock has, and also at the same time make it more sustainable. And a lasting impression of whenever there are droughts is that when the journalist or the media personnel want to drive a narrative that the drought is really severe, some of the images that we'll often see are of dead livestock and really to show the severity of drought. And this really presents an opportunity for us to become more innovative and come up with technologies that can mitigate some of these livestock losses that occur as a result of droughts. And some of these have to relate. Livestock usually will require water and pasture. And therefore, we have to think of technologies that enhance either water harvesting or water conservation, especially in times of drought, so that our livestock do not have to move long distances in search of pasture. And also, we have seen some technologies in terms of forages that have been developed, which can withstand droughts and ensure a bit of sustained supply of feed during that very severe period of drought. And this is a very welcome initiative, actually. And ILRI, I know, is working on some of this. And we need more of such so that we are able to have climate resilient forages and types of grasses that can withstand severe droughts. There is a story told, or rather a theory, which was presented, I think, by somebody called Harding, and it talks about the tragedy of commons. And the tragedy of commons talks about where you have open access to resources that individuals will likely try to maximize the utility that they are getting from that resource. For example, a pasture or a grassland. And what happens is without really considering the collective long-term good of conserving such pasture, it becomes depleted with time. And what we have observed is that, and through a lot of humanitarian organizations, especially in northern Kenya, where droughts are severe, we have seen formation of community groups, user groups that come together to try either to rehabilitate the grasslands and try to communally manage those grasslands so that as people pursue their self-interest to gain as much as possible that they can from these communal pastures, that there is also some level of control and conserving them so that they do not become depleted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for those very concrete examples. So then from that, let me move on now to the rest of the value of the food system, because of course we have an interest in livestock, but this report really is really about, it's also promoting the value of the local dietary cultures in local foods, traditional diets. And Kipkemoi in Calro is doing a lot of work on local foods. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about that. What role do local foods play in Kenya when we try to get closer to the recommended diet? And also, what role does research on those local foods really brings into this debate?
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Is it evening or afternoon? And good morning. And for those who are online, my name is Kipkemoi Changwony. I come from KALRO. KALRO stands for Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Research Organization. So I come from the prism of research, specifically in livestock. But to answer your question on foods, KALRO does more than just livestock. We also do crop research. We do environmental research. We do soils and socioeconomics research. We look at all aspects of research in agriculture and food. So therefore, KALRO has been in the business since a number of years back. We're looking at all sorts of crop varieties that are giving us our food, and also the species of livestock and various breeds that also give us our food. And along the way, the paradigm has been shifting, and currently we're looking at rethinking the issue of indigenous foods as not just more nutritious, more available to our local farmers, the people that we concentrate on, the resource poor farmers, and also the diversity of local foods within the Kenyan the population is important. And so we are rethinking back, and of late we've been looking at the leafy vegetables, as we have had in the conversation before, where KALRO now has gone to document, to select, to breed, and also promote the use of indigenous vegetables. And it has been a successful journey for the last few number of years. We're also looking at the fruits, including the wild fruits that have been neglected over time, and they were not constituting food as we have always categorized. And they are now coming into the mainstream. And so KALRO is building the resource base in terms of food by selecting and improving on what has traditionally been available to the population. We are looking at biofortification of the very same food crops that have been traditionally been used by our farmers, the millets, the sorghums, cassava, sometimes even the potatoes. We have gone into the space of biofortifying to improve their nutritional quality and improve their contribution to the food situation within the country. Not just within the crops area, we've also looked into the livestock area, where we're looking at the breeds of livestock that were traditionally neglected a century ago when the European settlers came to Kenya, and all they knew were the type of breeds that they were having in their home. And so they brought them because that's all the things they knew. And whatever they saw here were just things to be discarded, not even part of the discussion. Over time, the thinking has come to look into the advantages of those other breeds that existed, and to select from among those breeds to get the best producers within, because of the inherent advantages of their resistance to diseases, their resilience within the environments where they live in, and minding the fact that they have been contributing to the livelihoods of the people who have been keeping them for centuries. So KALRO is looking in all those directions, and we appreciate the contribution of livestock also in the nutrition of the people. And going forward, we are blending both the research knowledge that we have gained over time in looking at those foods that are indigenous to become the main contributor to the nutrition of the people going forward.
Thank you. So it's very nice to see so many concrete examples of what's happening, solutions that are being proposed for the local foods in terms of addressing health and also in the livestock sector. So if we put all that together and we reflect on the report effectively is not just a dietary guideline, it is a food system transformation report. It's about the food system transformation. So we have solutions, different institutions are putting forward ideas, testing them. What else is left to really embrace all this as a really global food system transformation? What is left in Kenya? Who else needs to do something? Who and how?
Well, looking at the panoramic view of food and the food system itself, we introduce areas, we come beyond production into the distribution, into the marketing, into the utilization of this same food, into storage, as we have. We look at safety of the same food. And so there are several aspects that must be looked into. You mentioned what else can be done. It quickly comes to my mind the issue of minimizing the losses, because we've got quite a lot of loss within that value chain of each and every commodity food. We estimate in Kenya that we lose 40% of what we produce between when they leave the farm and when they are when we get to the consumer. 40%. Even if we reduce that by a half, that in itself will translate to more food for the people without going back to the same environment to produce more. So in essence, it will be answering the question even before we look into altering the systems of production. So we're looking at losses in terms of during the transportation, during storage, during processing, and so forth. So if we can zero in also on minimizing food loss and also minimizing wastage of the food. Even after we have received the food and cooked, so much of it is basically wasted. It's not going to form part of the nutrition of the people. So if we look into those twin aspects, we are likely to accelerate the availability of the nutrients to the people without having to over-extract from the environment. So that is one area that has to be looked into.
Thank you. And I will add what Sipora mentioned at the beginning, which is we need to become more practical on policies. Policies, we have plenty of guidelines, policies, but maybe the enforcement and operationalization of those is not as strong. So we have to invest on that. Good. I'm aware of time, but this is a panel about health and nutrition mostly. So I cannot close this panel without asking Sipora the next question. Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges in low and middle income countries is that we have a double pattern. As Namukolo was explaining, we still have a large number of people who cannot get enough nutrients and enough food. And we have a small group, but maybe a fastly growing group that is maybe overshooting, as Mario mentioned before, consuming too much. From Minister of Health, Kembri, what can countries do to deal with that? And if you can give us at least one practical answer to that, Sipora.
A very difficult question because, I mean, like explained earlier by those who spoke before me, we're actually not talking about double, we're talking about a triple burden, because we do have the undernutrition, which doesn't seem to go away. For the longest, since I joined the nutrition field, don't ask how many years back, but those many years that made my hair gray, undernutrition has always been an issue. Now we have undernutrition and micronutrient deficiencies, and now we also have the NCDs with micronutrient deficiencies. The three are cutting across. So what is a practical way to do it? I think from a policy perspective, while I am not mainstream Ministry of Health, I am in an institution that is under the Ministry of Health. I think our policy environment should allow or should look at, and following back to what my colleague has said here from Calro, on the issue of wastage. because I think it's about having a shift in policy that allows food to be moved from one area to another. That has to be a government initiative. It cannot be at personal level, because government knows where the problems are, government knows where the food is being wasted. These reports are everywhere in the media, in the farmers. And so that shift is, I don't know how practical, but that is one way of dealing with wastage that can actually fill the gap of those who do not have sufficient. For those of us who are having a little more than we require, I think it's mindful. It's more of mindful consumption of what we take. When we go for nyama choma, you know, I don't think we measure. We order, isn't it? We order the meat, but you know, you eat to your fill. So if you can do half a kilo as a person, fair enough, that is. But the question is, do you need half a kilo to survive? I guess it's a moment of excitement. Some people it's once in a while, but for some people it's a routine thing. So I think it's more of, can we have more sensitization, knowledge shared out there, messaging that tells the challenges when you overconsume certain things, the risks that come with some of this consumption. Of course, some people say, you know, you're consuming that much because you're paying back for all the hard work you've done, but then you'll also pay back for all the troubles that will come with it. I think in 2015, there was an estimation that about 207 billion was being lost in addressing health-related risks that come with the kind of habits that we have. This is estimated to go up to about 607 billion or 70 billion in about 2050. That means all our hard-earned money will go back into the health sector to meet our medical requirements and medical needs. So I think there is a lot of education that needs to go out. We make a lot of assumptions that people do know, but I think we underestimate that environment. So for me, I think knowledge is the power that will help us deal with that. And then of course, if government then steps in and ensures that the policies are well articulated in terms of intervention, in terms of monitoring, and picking where the challenges are, intervention of those policies, we should be able to address that. Thanks.
Thank you. I told you we will get real, and I really like that we have very concrete ideas on what can be done. So to close this panel, I want to also ask the panelists to answer one question. So believe it or not, the commissioners of the report are already thinking on the EAT-Lancet 3.0. They're already starting to plan. So from what you read on this report, what is one recommendation you want to give them on what they've left out and they should put in, or how they have to readdress something? What will be your big recommendation? Who wants to go first?
Okay, I can start. So I've not read the report completely, but I'm curious if it's not there, the cost of diets. What is the cost of diets? When you say you don't want you to eat this much and that much, what does that entail? Bearing in mind contextual environment. We are in different settings, different exposures, different cultures. What will be the cost of a diet? I think that's, for me, that's the game changer. And I'm drawing this from some work that we have seen before, where there was costing of the cost of hunger, for example. There is that is done by for many countries. What is the cost of hunger? So how do we then address that with the cost of a diet? And saying, if you can put this together as a country, then you know your people have sufficient and just what they require. Thanks.
Good. Would you like to go next?
Well, I would have asked the question, so what? We have a report. The logical end of this report should be at the policy, mostly at the policy level. Did it get there, or who is going to take it there?
A plan of action. But after the report, who does what? Very good. All right. So our online panelist, Kennedy, do you want to answer this question, please?
Yes, I can attempt. Similar to Zipporah, I'm also still reading the report. But what I would say is it should not end up like many other reports that have been written and end up gaining dust on the shelves. We should follow up to see that it is actually implemented and scaled up so that everybody gets to benefit from it. Thank you.
So not only an action plan, also a monitoring plan. So
Yes.
I hope the commissioners are taking notes. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, and a big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sylvia, panelists. Thanks to everyone, those of you here in the room, those of you who've presented, been in panels. This is not the end. There's a reception. So Zipporah, we're going to stand up for the rest of the evening at the reception with no more sitting after this. Just a few minutes more sitting because I'd like to invite ILRI's Deputy Director General for Research, Partnerships and Impact, Siboniso Moyo, to just give some closing remarks before we go to the reception.
Thanks a lot, Shelley. Good evening, good afternoon again. It's been a long afternoon, so my role is just to, again, thank you all for participating today. But I just wanted to use 2 minutes to, why did we come together? Just remind ourselves as we depart. We came together to highlight the relevant EAT-Lancet findings on the role of livestock in Africa's food systems transformation. We also set to unpack and contextualize these findings, but also try and define clearly some pathways and priority actions. We had very productive and rich presentations, discussions. I'm not going to even try and summarize this because it's been very rich. But I wanted to just pick up a few that I had, what I had. The dialogue has shown that the EAT-Lancet report has potential for synergies and alignment with country, regional, and continental strategies. Therefore, this is an opportunity to reimagine the food systems transformation by exploring the health and nutrition considerations. Many in the presentations underlined the issue of context. Context matters. There's also a need to create systemic shifts, looking at innovations, technologies, policies, communities, civil society, researchers. How do we all come together as a system and really reimagine this transformation? We hope that the organizations and individuals that participated here today in the room and online will read this report again in more detail and explore how they can use it in their day-to-day work and in their programming. Thank you, Bertha, for sharing ACRA's experience in how you are already putting this into practice. The last session for me brought it close to home here in Kenya. They gave us some practical ways of how we can operationalize this, but they also called for, let's move from the report to practical action and monitoring. That was very key and underlined in the end. So some keywords I had: dialogue, contextualization, fairness, private sector-driven food systems transformation are an opportunity. Let's use them to reimagine the food systems transformation. Justice lens in this report is very much appreciated, and knowledge is power. So science, with science we can. Special thanks to all. Shelley has extended this. We appreciate the commissioners here for sharing their own experiences, their thoughts, the panelists, the facilitators, everyone for your contributions, for your participation. Those here in the room and online, again, I want to recognize and appreciate the presence of the heads of missions or their representatives, the senior government officials from the different ministries and the President's office, the development partners, researchers, civil society, private sector, farmer representatives, and all present. The challenge with naming, you will miss someone, but please feel very much appreciated for your engagement this afternoon. So special thanks to the organizers. A group of people put this together. So we thank you very much. And to all that facilitated the logistics for our event. Wishing you all a good evening. This marks the end of our event, and asanteni sana. You are all invited to the networking session near the poolside. Stay away from the pool for a while. So let's have a great evening together. Thank you very much.